So let's get to the key word here. Let's get to the key word of this verse that's going to pull it all together. Okay, we've gone over all of the ingredients of this recipe. We've looked at the testimony of his conscience, that he lived his life with simplicity and godly sincerity. He didn't live according to fleshly wisdom. He lived by the grace of God. These are all of the ingredients, but if you have a recipe and you have a bunch of ingredients, what do you have? A bunch of ingredients. If you're trying to bake a cake and you get out the milk, eggs, sugar, flour, all of that fun stuff, and you just put it on the counter, what do you have? A bunch of random ingredients. You've got to take those ingredients and do something with them before you get your cake. So we've been shown what the ingredients are. What is it we do with those ingredients? We'll look again at the verse. For our rejoicing is this, the testimony of our conscience, that in simplicity and godly sincerity, not with fleshly wisdom, but by the grace of God, we have had our conversation in the world, and more abundantly to you word. One of the key words in that verse, the one that tells us what to do with all of the ingredients, is that three-letter word, had. H-A-D. You want to know why that's important? Because it's past tense. When Paul writes that, he says, we have had our conversation in the world. He's saying, we lived this way in the past and we're living this way right now. Notice here, Paul's joy came. Paul could rejoice. Paul could have happiness. Paul had joy in his life because he had lived. He had conducted himself a certain way in the past. Paul's rejoicing didn't come. Paul didn't sit down and write this verse and say, we will have our conversation in the world. He didn't say at some future point in time we're going to have our conversation in this world. He didn't say tomorrow. He didn't say next week. He didn't say at some vague point in the future after he had had all of his fun and he was ready to get right with God. He said, no, I have had. In the past I have lived this way. And that is important. You want to know why? Because it meant all of the sacrifice, all of the effort, all of the work that he had put in to each and every one of those moments throughout his life had a payoff. It may not have been what he thought he wanted. It may not have been what he thought would bring him joy, but he set that aside. He set his fleshly wisdom aside. He did what God wanted, and it paid off. It gave him joy. See, you're only in the present for this one instant. After that instant is past, it's in the past. You can't get it back. You can't do it over. You get one shot to live in the present, and then it's done. Paul took that present, he took that moment, and he lived in a godly way. He lived straightforward. And when that moment was past, when that instant was past, when he was on the other side of that moment, it brought him joy. If we want a life of rejoicing, if we want joy in our life, it's not going to come from making a decision and saying, in the future I am going to do this. It's going to come from being godly in this present instant right now so that when you get on the other side of it, you can look back and say, you know what? I have been faithful. Look at all of these things that I've conquered in my life. Look at all of these things that God has done through my life. It doesn't come from the future. It came from the past.